What do you think is the most dangerous animal in the world? Cobra, polar bear, lion, tiger, or maybe mosquito? Our next speaker claims that a gray rhino will be a huge threat to the world. U.S. policy analyst Michele Wucker coined the term, gray rhino, to depict highly visible, high-impact threats that people should see coming, but often do not. Michele Wucker is founder of Gray Rhino and Company and the author of the international bestseller The Gray Rhino. She is a frequent speaker and media commentator on matters of the global economy, risk management, leadership, and immigration. I hope you get some insights from her speech. Please welcome Ms. Michele Wucker with a round of applause.
Thank you. Can we get another round of applause for the robot? This is the first time I've ever been introduced by a robot, and I think it's super cool, so round of applause for the robot. Great to be here today. I think some of you already know my friend, the Gray Rhino, but I wanted to take a couple minutes to just help you get to know the Gray Rhino a little bit better, since the Gray Rhino is a very big part of my life these days. One thing, it's obvious. It's 2 tons. It's really, really big. It's right in front of you. It's pretty hard to ignore, or at least it ought to be. It's highly probable. If the rhino is coming at you and pawing the ground and snorting and seems kind of upset, it's pretty likely it's going to come right at you, and it's not going to be good. It's a metaphor for things in life, obviously. The thing that you know is going to happen when stock markets are at record highs and interest rates are rising, when you see sea levels rising and temperatures rising, it's not good. It's those sort of big questions, but they can also be obvious questions in your daily life, whether it's a health or a finance or a relationship issue. So it can be from the very biggest level to something that seems very small, but that's very, very big for the person that involves. The other part of the gray rhino is that it's neglected, it's downplayed, it's not getting resolved. I say ignored. It's a sort of a catch-all phrase to put all of this together. We might not actually be ignoring something completely. In fact, unlike its cousin, the elephant in the room, the gray rhino is something that we do talk about, that we do know is there, and we're just not giving it its due. The important thing about the gray rhino is that unlike the elephant in the room, it gives us a choice to do something about it. The definition of the elephant in the room is that it's something that's big and stands there. Nobody talks about it. Nobody does anything. And that sort of normalizes this idea that we don't do anything in face of a big, obvious, scary problem. And I really want to change that. The gray rhino is a challenge and an opportunity to everyone. It's really got a powerful emotional resonance to it. Many of you also know the Black Swan, the highly improbable thing, the thing we can't even picture or imagine. I look at the millions and millions of searches that come up for Black Swans, all the people who spend so much time focusing on something that by definition we can't even imagine. And I think, wait a minute, at the same time, there's so many obvious things that are not getting their due, that we see the outline of, that we've got a better chance at doing something about it. And when we're spending all of our time imagining something that's unimaginable, we're really wasting our energy. But I do love the way the Black Swan is such a powerful emotional image that gets people to focus on something. It's a picture right in front of their head that gets them to think about something abstract. And I want the Gray Rhino to do very much the same thing, and have been delighted to see the way that it is starting to do that around the world. It also provides an analytical framework. When I started the book, I started thinking about financial crisis in Argentina and Greece, but then very quickly started looking at corporate problems, at scandals, at succession issues, at marketing problems, and at other policy issues around the world. And I mapped a sort of a 5-stage progression of a gray rhino, from denial at the beginning, through muddling, when you know it's there, you're not really denying it, but you're not really dealing with it. Diagnosing, you're trying to find out what the right solution is to the problem and what you can do, what's available, and what the obstacles are. Panic, That's the time when you see the big thing coming, it's right on top of you, and you have absolutely no idea what to do. You're either going to freeze or you're going to do something, and more likely than not, it's going to be the wrong thing. And then there's action. And ideally, you want to get from denial to action as soon as you possibly can. The thing I really want you to remember, if you remember nothing else about the Gray Rhino, is that it's a very, very simple concept. It's that we don't do as well as we'd like to think that we do at dealing with the obvious things in front of us. And it might seem strange that, well, of course something's obvious and we're paying attention to it, but whenever there's a crisis, you look back at all the missed warnings and you realize that you can't take for granted that just because something is obvious, you are dealing with it. So we're all here today because one particular Gray Rhino, not just this session, but really all the discussions that have been going on over the past couple days, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, all the technologies that are changing our lives. I just got introduced by a very charming robot. It's a great example of that. This shift from using assets on our own to finding digital platforms to share them, automation, artificial intelligence. I have an artificial intelligence scheduling bot who helps me out. I've worked with artificial intelligence translators and am starting to see it in so many more areas of my life. The other day I was actually on a website, I needed technical support, and I filled in the little chat box, and then the person, well, I didn't know if it was a person or a bot who responded to me, and the first thing I asked was, are you human or are you a bot? And in this case I was very relieved that it was a human, because there are some things that, as advanced as machines are getting, that only humans can do. All of these new technologies are shaking up the world. You've probably seen it in your daily life as well. And they're also going to have a huge impact. And this is a great example of something that is, you might say, is ignored. It's in the headlines all the time, but are we really dealing with it? And some people might be further ahead in dealing with the question, and others not. So what I want to do today is trace for you a little bit the diagnosis of what's going on, what are the impacts going to be of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, then move on to ask some questions about how each of us, how our organizations, how our policymakers are responding to it, and then move on to some possible ideas, really some food for thought, the beginning of a discussion that I hope you take out of here today on what are we going to do about it. Obviously, industry is changing. Jobs. Jobs, jobs, jobs. I think that's really the central question. We're going to see a lot of menial jobs disappear, repetitive jobs, probably a lot of the jobs that people who are doing are not very happy about doing, but what are they going to be replaced with? The social contract is going to be challenged. We've already seen in the past decades a huge increase in economic inequality that has led to populist surges in the United States and in Europe. And we're going to see a lot more social tensions. At the same time, that technology is increasing some of these disparities. So the people who have the technology, who invest in the technology, are going to continue advancing even further ahead. And we've got to really think hard about what that means for society as a whole, for the people who are not going to have the kinds of jobs that they did before. How do we get them better jobs? How do we make their lives better? The education and skills gap. In many cases, people won't need as much education to do certain tasks as they did before. I think about accounting. All the training and math that people have to study, they are not going to have to do in nearly as much depth anymore, unless they want to be the ones who are directing artificial intelligence, shaping where that's going in the future, what it's doing for us. So it's going to open up a lot of opportunities to many people. At the same time, we've got so many new robots, artificial intelligence systems coming up. We're going to need people to maintain those, to program them. A whole lot of science, technology, engineering, math skills that the world is woefully behind on. We also need to pay some attention to creativity, one of the areas where humans are so far ahead of machines. And I hope I'm not angering anyone, but I think we always will be. But we don't spend enough time encouraging people to develop those skills. You hear the story of the starving artist, and it's all too true. Security, whether it has to do with data breaches, with drones, with the Internet of Things. You hear about refrigerators possibly being hacked. You hear about pacemakers and people's hearts being attacked. There are all sorts of security problems that arise from our dependence on machines, particularly as it increases. Inequality, I've spoken about a bit. Migration is another very interesting issue, and an issue I've written about quite a bit, that migrants tend to come because they're very low-skilled or very high-skilled. So there's going to be a lot less demand for low-skilled migrants who would be doing repetitive tasks that humans don't want to do. There's also going to be increasing demand at the higher end of the socioeconomic scheme. So that's going to be challenging in terms of what decisions countries make, in terms of who they let into their country and who they don't. Particularly as the social contract phrase, you're going to see more movements like we've seen in the United States and Europe resisting immigration, even though it's automation, it's other forces that may not necessarily be the migrants that are causing people distress, but migrants get the blame. Trade gets the blame. People in other countries tend to get the blame. So we're going to see a lot of stresses. Pensions and aging are another very important area. As people get older, and particularly as the proportion of younger people in the economy shrinks, older people are going to need more people to help them as there are labor shortages. So in that sense, automation and AI can be very, very good things. The fourth industrial revolution can help us so much. At the same time, under the current system, robots don't pay into pensions. That's going to put a lot of stress on public finances unless we rethink the way we do things in society. Healthcare, all sorts of information is going to change the way we take care of our health, what insurers know, what people know about us. Huge changes coming there with some really serious ethical issues. Privacy, transportation, driverless cars. We've got a Google driverless car in this picture. We've seen lots of predictions about how taxi drivers are going to lose their jobs. But at the same time, how cities are not going to need nearly as many cars. We're not going to need as many parking spaces. There are lots of opportunities in urban planning to turn parking spaces into parks. And we'll look at a couple more numbers here as to what this could mean for economies. And these numbers you should think of as very rough guides. They tend to change very quickly. There's a lot of disagreement about what's going to happen. But just a couple of ideas that are out there. Carl Frey, who was here yesterday, did this widely cited study saying that about 47% of US jobs are vulnerable to automation by 2055, which is not that far away. In developing countries, as much as 2/3 of jobs could disappear as a result of automation. At the same time, as productivity increases, we could see the jobs that exist being better paid, people being better off if they have those jobs. McKinsey, interestingly, predicts that less than 5% of jobs can be fully automated, which is interesting. There are lots of debates over whether the fourth industrial revolution is going to bring us more jobs or fewer jobs. And I think that leads us towards the idea that they're going to be different jobs. $16 trillion in global wages. So we're talking about very, very large impacts on the job markets, on our economies of the fourth industrial revolution. There are also lots of non-economic predictions about what could happen as a result of the changes that we're seeing. As inequality increases, as power and money concentrates in the tech sectors, what happens to the people who are getting left behind? Are we going to see more and more and more social-political tensions? What might that lead to? As people blame migrants or other countries, we could see a very, very dystopian picture. And in fact, Stephen Hawking has predicted the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. There are some science fiction interpretations of this as well. What if we train more and more drones and robots to attack? Could they attack on their own? There's a remake out of Blade Runner, which was one of my favorite movies when the original came out, that really tests that very question. What if the robots turn on us? What if artificial intelligence decides that the human race often is quite irresponsible and maybe the world will be better off without it? So that's really the domain of Hollywood, but it's something we can't rule out, and that some of the very smartest people in the world are thinking about, and I think we would be foolish not to think of some of the ethical and security considerations involved. So how can the Gray Rhino framework help us to think through how to deal with all of these very big and scary possibilities? And also some opportunities as well. I talked about denial. Since you're in this room, my guess is that you're probably not in the denial stage, that you've got a pretty good idea that there's something big we need to pay attention to. So we'll throw that off to the side. But I think you're also here because you want to know more about what we can do and what's happening. And just a hunch, you might, like me, be very worried that not enough is really happening. In some areas, things are going very fast, but that there are lots of problems to be solved, and we really haven't come up with the answers. So I think we're really in this muddling stage, kicking the can down the road. Well, let's think about it some more and deal with the problem. I want to go into just a little bit more depth on this. Why do we muddle? Why do we kick the can down the road and not deal with things right away? Not having good answers is a very good start, and in just a minute we're going to talk a little bit more about diagnosis and possible actions and solutions. But for now, I would love for each of you to leave today and think about what's happening in your company, in your family, in your own career, in your community. What are you doing and why are you not doing more to deal with this? In many cases, there's a lack of urgency. Yesterday, we spoke about some numbers, some very, very interesting numbers came out of a study asking when Westerners and Asians expected that machines would be able to do things as well or better than humans. Westerners thought it would take about 74 years. Asians thought it would be about half of that. So it said to me that basically in Asia there's a much higher sense of urgency for how we deal with the fourth industrial revolution. And that I think is lucky for you guys, not so lucky for me. But that's one question. Lack of resources. What do we do about it? Is there a way to think differently about how resources are allocated, how budgets are done? In many cases, people just know what they have to do. They just don't have a way to do it. In which case, the question is really, okay, how do we get what we need? Entrenched interests and perverse incentives. I think there are a lot of people who don't want to see things change. You look at, say, the fossil fuels industry in a bigger picture. They feel very threatened by clean technologies and are doing everything they can to fight climate change efforts to stop climate change because they see that this thing is coming and it's not going to work out very well from them. Some energy companies are investing already in clean tech, and those are the ones who are looking at the future saying, hey, this isn't just a threat, there is an opportunity, and if we go ahead, we're going to come out ahead in the end. The wrong narrative. Yesterday, we heard a couple of very, very different stories about what AI and the fourth industrial revolution mean for the world. On the one hand, it's creating a lot of new jobs. We don't know what they're going to be yet. But just as previous industrial revolutions did, it created lots of opportunities while destroying other ones. Some people are more optimistic about where this is going to go. Other people, not so much. I take an approach that's not quite so deterministic. I think it depends on each one of us and on the decisions that policymakers and businesses and citizens take. I think there's a lot of possibility that a lot of good could come out of this, but that's only going to happen if we also deal with the downside. So we need to balance these two narratives, the good and the bad, the utopian and dystopian, and bring them together. Bell the cat syndrome. There's an old folktale where all the mice in the walls are very upset about the cat that keeps coming and trying to eat them, and they come up with a plan, and they say, we're going to put a bell on the cat. That's what we're going to do. And then they sit around, and one little mouse sticks up his little paw, and he says, but who is going to bell the cat? And of course, none of the mice had a very good answer to that. And often, when I look at the reasons why people don't do something about an obvious threat, it's because they don't feel they have any power to do something about it. So that's what the bell the cat syndrome is. And then there's strategic muddling, which is when you know what you need to do, but not everything is in line. Universal basic income is a great example of this. There are lots of experiments, lots of thinking about how it might work. The experiments are happening more, in Canada, in Europe. The United States, I have a very hard time pursuing this because of political reasons. And so that's the kind of thing where you put a plan in place, you move it forward where you can, and you wait for the opportune moment to move it ahead in other places. So I want to switch to opportunities. This is really about the diagnosis of the situation, if we're following the positive narrative of what's going on. There are two pictures here. One of them is an original Rembrandt. The other one is a Rembrandt drawn by artificial intelligence. They asked it to analyze all of the paintings that Rembrandt had done, figure out what is it that made a Rembrandt, and come up with a painting. And it's actually quite difficult to tell which one is which. Actually, the real one is, I believe, the one on my right, your left, and the fake one is the one on my left, your right. And it's fascinating to me, really, as a novelty to see that this exists. But can you picture someone paying tens or hundreds of millions of dollars for a painting that a robot did? I read an article the other day about Elton John saying that really there have been so many electronic reproductions of his work and other artists' work, but people still pay more to go see him in person than just to listen to all of these electronic reproductions. And that's really, to me, a commentary on value. And that's where we find opportunity in the fourth industrial revolution. Looking at where the value lies in what humans can do versus what machines and robots can do. And this is a question also I really want you to take out of this room and think about for yourself, because there's lots and lots of definitions that we can go with. There are two areas I think are most important. One is creativity. Artworks, although we've already started to see, in addition to this, other artificial intelligence systems creating artworks of their own. But there's really a lot from human experience that can be applied to art that machines are never going to be able to do. Also, caregiving and social interactions. You look at parenting of children, and there's a huge societal need for that. That if people are working 2 jobs, 3 jobs just to make ends meet, they don't have the time to raise their children, to give them the skills that they need, to build the social fabric and repair the social fabric that we need. And if time is freed up by machines, then there's an opportunity to really build on that. Digital identities. Right now, probably everyone in this room is on social media, and you do so many things online. Right now, social media offers, quote unquote, for free to participate in their products, but you're really the product. They're selling your information. If we could flip that and get people to realize, no, we're not going to give our information for free, it might completely change the dynamic. It might allow people to free up some of their time, and it might equalize some of the imbalances between people who have the technology, the platforms, and the people who are using them. The end of menial tasks, I've spoke about a little bit before, the dangerous things, the repetitive things, the things that nobody wants to do. If we could get machines to do those, and shorten work days, shorten work weeks. I've actually seen some studies that people could work as few as 4 hours a week and do what they want to do. That would be amazing. It's obviously utopian. We want people to have purpose and value to their lives. How do we get people to really recognize the value of what they are doing that is not necessarily monetized at an old-fashioned job? Lots more time for creativity. We see so many mass-produced things in factories, but with more opportunities to do things by hand, perhaps we could go back to the golden age of the Renaissance when you had artisans doing all sorts of craft work and applying beauty and creativity to daily life. I mentioned that our robot friend isn't going to pay into a pension, but what if they could? What if robots worked and let us all do what we're best at? Extremely utopian, but I think it's not impossible. I think we can do some thought experiments as to what that might look like. Civic technologies, finding ways for technology to help governments to be much more transparent, to help governments to learn more about what people really want and need, and to pull all of these ideas together into rebuilding a social fabric that right now is very much frayed. So what do we do to pursue these opportunities and to avoid some of the pitfalls? There's a couple of ideas. Our little friend Wally is waving and saying, hey, you don't have to despair. One is, just let some jobs go. There are things that people shouldn't be doing. Going through landmines and defusing them. Hopefully there won't be that much more coal mining, but dangerous, environmentally difficult jobs, nuclear cleanups, those sort of things. We should let the robots do those dangerous, scary things, and even just some of the unpleasant things. Bill Gates has proposed the idea of a payroll tax on robots. And it's very interesting. It's kind of a fun idea. I can see there's probably a movie coming out about that fairly soon. People in the technology world say, hey, robots increase productivity. You don't want to tax something that it's good to have more of. And I understand that argument, but in a world where you've got so much income concentration and so much social unrest that could put at risk all of the economic gains that have been created, I think you need to think about it in a more holistic way. Universal basic income. Is there a way for people to not worry so much about whether they're going to get health care, whether they're going to have something to eat? Some of the early experiments have shown that people who get a base amount of pay don't just sit around and drink beer all the time or twiddle their thumbs or sit on social media, that people still want to create value. They still want meaning. And this took off some of the stress of starting something new. As an entrepreneur, as a former nonprofit executive, as someone who has worked in many situations where you need to raise money, I certainly know that when I had a much bigger cushion, it made it much easier for me to focus on creative things, on strategy, on adding value, without this sort of low-level stress that makes it very, very hard to do what you're best at. So there are lots of ways we can think about how to use a universal basic income to help us to mitigate the worst effect of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Talked about urban design, education, and skills. Would love to hear all of your ideas. Speaking of belling the cat, who's going to do what? Government policy has a big role in education. Businesses, how are they going to train their own employees and reward them? Individuals, what can each of us do in our home? Just to remind you, this is all right in front of us, and we need to remember not to ignore it. Sergey Brin from Google says, the revolution in artificial intelligence has been profound. It definitely surprised me, even though I was sitting right there. Some questions for all of you to think about as you're heading out. How will the Fourth Industrial Revolution affect your business, your job, your industry? What are you doing about it? What opportunities could you pursue? And how does what you've done so far compare to what you need to do. One last note before closing. When I started writing The Gray Rhino, I thought of this big 2-ton thing with a horn coming at you, and it was really, really scary. Then I went on safari and learned about the poaching crisis. And then all my friends started sending me these cute baby rhino videos on the internet, which are really adorable. I encourage you to go look some of them up. But I realized that humans are actually much more of a threat to rhinos than they are to us. So I started feeling very guilty about portraying the rhino in a very, very scary way. But it's actually a very good metaphor and part of the message of the book and the message that I want you to take today, which is that the rhino is not necessarily your enemy. If you see the rhino before other people do, if you pay attention to it, you're going to be way ahead of all of those other people who say, well, this is obvious, I'm dealing with it, so I don't need to think about it more. You know, when you're really paying attention to the obvious, you are way ahead, and the rhino very much is your friend. So, in closing, I want to ask you to ask one more question to yourself. As you see the Gray Rhino, the fourth industrial revolution, in front of you, do you want to nurture a cute little baby rhino from the YouTube videos? Or do you want to face a charging, scary beast that is only scary because you didn't pay attention to it? Thank you all, and thank our robot friend again.